This case is the epitome of a nightmare, the kind that sends shivers through communities, forces governments to re-examine policies, and reminds us that the most horrifying monsters sometimes emerge from the quiet corners of ordinary lives. Nicholas Prosper wasn't the kid who stood out. He was quiet, geeky, and socially withdrawn. To his neighbors, he was just another teenager glued to his screen. But behind that closed door, in the isolation of his bedroom, he was brewing something sinister. What started as an obsession with violent video games spiraled into something far more dangerous: an infatuation with mass shootings, a desire for notoriety, and an unshakable delusion that he was some kind of chosen one. His plan was as chilling as it was methodical. He forged a gun license, bought a shotgun from an unsuspecting seller, and plotted a massacre that could have rivaled the worst school shootings in history. His own family, his mother and younger siblings, were merely obstacles, collateral damage on his path to infamy. Had the police not intercepted him by chance, Britain would have witnessed its deadliest school shooting yet. Beyond the horror, beyond the headlines, lies the real tragedy: the loss of a mother who lived for her children, a teenage boy who dreamed of football and boxing, and a 13-year-old girl described as a beautiful soul. Their names should be the ones remembered, not the monster who took them away. But perhaps the harshest lesson is this: evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it grows in the quiet corners, right in front of our eyes, waiting for the moment to strike. Before the bloodshed, before the horror, before Nicholas Prosper became a name synonymous with cold-blooded violence, there was a family. A mother who had worked hard to build a life in a foreign country. A father who, though separated from the mother of his children, still cared deeply for his family. And siblings who, by all accounts, were full of promise, warmth, and innocence. To truly understand the tragedy of Nicholas Prosper, we must first step into the world he was born into. A world that for years seemed to hold nothing extraordinary, nothing out of the ordinary, until one day everything unraveled. This is the story of how he got there. Welcome to another episode on Crime Matinee, where we deep dive into chilling stories that reveal the darkest corners of human behavior and the lessons we can learn from them. If you've been enjoying Crime Matinee so far, please like and share our videos, leave a thumbs up and drop comments below so I can reach out to you, and don't forget to subscribe so you can be notified whenever I drop a new video. Juliana Falcon was born in Mar del Plata, Argentina on June 4th, 1976. Her early life was shaped by a love of the arts, but like many dreamers, she was drawn to the idea of something bigger. In her early 20s, she made the life-altering decision to move to England, where she hoped to carve out a future. It was there that she met and married Ray Prosper, and together they had 4 children. Juliana was known as a hard-working, devoted mother. She wasn't just a parent. She was a pillar of strength, the kind of woman who lived for her children. As those who knew her would later say, she worked at Sainsbury's, always speaking fondly of her kids, proud of their accomplishments. Even after her marriage to Ray ended in divorce, Juliana remained a loving and involved mother, raising 3 of her 4 children in a council flat in Luton. Though the family faced their fair share of financial struggles, she was determined to give her children the best life that she could. Her eldest son lived with his father, while the other 3, Nicholas, Kyle, and Giselle, remained with her. For years, she likely never saw what was brewing beneath the surface in her second oldest son, Or if she did, she may have chalked it up to typical teenage withdrawal. But what was happening in Nicholas's mind was something far more dangerous than teenage angst. At 16, Kyle Prosper was everything Nicholas was not. He was social, outgoing, and full of energy. He had a passion for football and boxing, an active presence on TikTok, and a tight-knit cycle of friends who described him as confident, welcoming, and full of life. Then there was Giselle, the youngest of the family, at 13 years old. She was bright, kind, and a model student, excelling at Lee Manor High School, where teachers would later describe her as a beautiful soul. She too had been excited about the future. She had dreams, aspirations, a life that should have stretched out in front of her for decades to come. Ray Prosper was divorced from Juliana, but he wasn't absent from his children's lives. He still cared, still loved them deeply. And when his world was turned upside down, when he found out that his own son had killed 3 members of his family, his grief was unbearable. Nicholas Prosper was born into the world on the 18th of December in 2005. His early years were unremarkable, at least on the surface. A quiet, intelligent boy, he developed a keen interest in computers and for a time had a small group of friends, but things started to shift. As he got older, Nicholas withdrew. Teachers and family noticed that he was becoming more isolated, spending most of his time online. By his teenage years, his world had shrunk to the size of a screen, where he lost himself in video games, violent content, and online forums that celebrated death and destruction. He was later diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, but experts would go on to say that his descent into violence wasn't simply a result of neurodivergence. There was something more, a profound lack of empathy, a hunger for notoriety, a deep-seated darkness that went beyond mental health. His parents had concerns. His school had concerns. He was even referred to a GP for mental health support. But Nicholas refused to engage, and so, alone in his bedroom, he continued down a path that led to one of the most horrifying crimes in modern British history. In the end, Juliana, Kyle, and Giselle never had a chance. They would simply become the casualties of what Nicholas had planned as a much larger bloodbath. If childhood is where the seeds of a person's identity are planted, then adolescence is the soil in which they grow or wither. For Nicholas Prosper, his teenage years were a time of quiet unraveling, a slow-motion collapse that would culminate in one of the most chilling crimes in modern British history. From a withdrawn but otherwise normal child, he became a young man consumed by violent fantasies, delusions of grandeur, and an insatiable thirst for destruction. The warning signs were there, flashing like neon lights, but no one could have predicted just how deep his darkness ran. By the time Nicholas entered his teenage years, his world had already begun to shrink. He wasn't the kind of troubled youth who got into fights, skipped school, or had run-ins with the law. No, his rebellion was more insidious. It was a retreat into isolation, an ever-deepening obsession with the online world, where he found a disturbing sense of belonging. He wasn't a social outcast at first. Teachers described him as a quiet but intelligent boy, and he had a small group of friends in his early teens, mostly other boys who shared his interest in computers and video games. But something changed around the age of 15. He stopped hanging out with friends. He rarely spoke in class unless directly called upon. He spent nearly all his time online, deep diving into dark and violent corners of the internet. He developed a deep obsession with school shootings, studying them as if preparing for an exam. At first, people thought it was just typical teenage withdrawal, a phase that would soon eventually pass. But for Nicholas, it wasn't a phase, it was an evolution. By 16, Prosper's online activity had taken a deeply disturbing turn. The internet was his sanctuary, his church, his poison, and he was consuming content that no young person should be exposed to. He was banned from an online gore community for making pro-pedophilia and necrophilia comments. He was obsessed with school shooters, reading manifestos, watching footage, and glorifying their crimes. He was drawn to fictional characters in violent video games, particularly Clementine from The Walking Dead, seeing her as a savior-like figure. He fantasized about hurting his family, particularly his younger sister, over an in-game choice she had made just months prior. By 17, he was no longer just an observer, he was planning. In 2022, at 17 years old, Nicholas left secondary school. This was the turning point, the moment when whatever fragile connection he had to normal life snapped. His school had tried to intervene. Teachers noticed a change in him. He had grown even more withdrawn, his gaze vacant, his presence unsettling. They referred him for mental health support, but Nicholas refused to engage. Without school, he had no structure, no routine, no purpose. He tried to attend sixth form, but it didn't last. He couldn't hold a job, failing to keep even basic employment. He withdrew even further into his online obsessions. He was now fully immersed in planning his own massacre. This is when Nicholas ceased to exist as an ordinary young man. What was left was something unrecognizable, a void shaped like a human being, filled with nothing but malice, rage, and the desire to be remembered for the worst possible reasons. By early 2024, Nicholas had started actively researching how to obtain a gun in the UK, a country with some of the strictest firearm laws in the world. He was patient, meticulous. He joined online gun marketplaces, pretending to be a hobbyist. He studied firearm licenses, learning how they were structured. He forged his own gun license, using real examples he found online. He failed in his first attempt to buy a gun, but he didn't give up. Then, in September 2024, he struck gold. Using his faked gun license, he bought a 12-bore Japanese Nikko shotgun and 100 cartridges from a legitimate dealer. The seller followed protocol and reported the sale to the police, but under the current UK system, there was a 7-day window before any verification was required. Nicholas had just enough time. It was the evening of September 12, 2024, the day before the attack, and in the dimly lit confines of his council flat in Marsh Farm, Luton, Nicholas Prosper sat alone in his bedroom, consumed by the dark fantasies he had been nurturing for months. He barely slept. He stayed up all night, indulging in a ritual of violence, his final preparation before unleashing hell. His plan had been meticulously crafted, a blueprint for terror, refined through countless hours of research, digital rants, and self-glorifying videos. He wasn't simply planning murder, he was crafting a legacy of horror, something that would ensure his name would be spoken in the same breath as the world's most infamous mass killers. Tonight, he would make sure everything was perfect. Prosper had spent much of the previous months assembling his tools of destruction, but tonight it was all about final preparation. At 9 p.m, he locked himself in his room, staring at his laptop screen, watching footage of mass shootings, Columbine, Sandy Hook, Virginia Tech. He absorbed every movement, every tactical detail. By 10:30 p.m., he filmed himself practicing with a wooden plank, mimicking the weight and feel of his shotgun. He posed in front of the camera, holding it like a murderer in training, ensuring that when the time came, his hands won't tremble. Around midnight, he recorded one final video, his manifesto of madness. He spoke about his destiny, about how he was chosen by the Walking Dead's Clementine, how his sister had to die for making the wrong choice in the game, and how he was about to surpass all other school shooters. By 2 a.m., he had packed his essentials: a shotgun, 12-bore Nico, loaded, extra ammunition, over 30 cartridges, stuffed into a bag, a knife as a backup weapon, though he planned to use it only if necessary. His uniform, a striking black and yellow outfit, reminiscent of a comic book villain, chosen specifically so people would remember him. At 4:30 a.m., as the world outside remained asleep, he stood in his bedroom mirror. He had a cold, dead stare, but inside he felt invincible. At 5 a.m., he stepped into the hallway. His massacre had begun. Nicholas had originally planned to kill his family in their sleep, ensuring a silent execution before heading to the primary school, but fate had other plans because his mother woke up, and in that moment the plan fell apart, but the bloodshed had only just begun. She must have sensed something was wrong, perhaps the creak of a floorboard, the eerie stillness in the air. At 5 a.m., Juliana Falcon, a mother who had spent her life protecting her children, now found herself staring down the barrel of her own son's shotgun. She didn't go down without a fight. She lunged at Nicholas, struggling to push the shotgun away. For a brief moment, it seemed like she might overpower him, but Nicholas was stronger, fueled by power and pure hate. A shotgun blast rang out. The force of the shot threw her backward, blood spattering across the walls. She collapsed in the hallway, her body twitching for a few moments before going still. Nicholas, in his twisted joke, placed a book on her legs, How to Kill Your Family. But the sound had awoken Kyle and Giselle, and they were next. He hunted his siblings down like prey. 13-year-old Giselle Prosper had no chance. Hearing the commotion, she did the only thing a terrified child would do. She hid. She crawled under the dining table, pressing herself against the cold floor, praying her brother wouldn't find her. But Nicholas did. He saw her cowering, trembling, her eyes wide, filled with terror. He didn't hesitate. He aimed the shotgun and fired point blank at her face. It's gut-wrenching to think that in her final moments, she was simply a terrified child trying to escape a fate she couldn't comprehend. And for what? Because Nicholas believed she had made an incorrect choice in a video game. Because in his mind, she had somehow wronged a fictional character, Clementine, from The Walking Dead. It sounds absurd, but this is the danger of delusion. When the lines between reality and fantasy blur in the most terrifying ways. In sheer contrast to the life she hoped for, she died in a moment of sheer terror, hiding under the dining table as Nicholas pulled the trigger. The force of the blast threw her backward, her small frame crumpling lifelessly beneath the table. It was brutal, merciless, and devoid of humanity, and Kyle had seen it all. It was now 5:15 a.m. Kyle, a fighter, not just in the boxing ring, but in spirit, now in the final moments of his life. 16-year-old Kyle Prosper wasn't going to die without a fight. Unlike Giselle, he didn't hide. He ran to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and prepared to defend himself. He fought to the bitter end, but Nicholas was already in full predator mode. Nicholas fired once. Kyle took the shot to the chest, but stayed standing. Kyle lunged. He tried to stab Nicholas, but the knife barely grazed him. At this point, Nicholas snapped. He tackled Kyle to the ground, knocking the knife from his grip. Then came the frenzy. Nicholas stabbed Kyle over 100 times. His arms, his neck, his chest. He tore into him with pure rage. Kyle begged for his life, but Nicholas didn't stop. Finally, Nicholas ends it all with a single shot. He shoots Kyle in the head, silencing his screams. The entire apartment was drenched in blood. Kyle's murder was particularly gruesome, not just in execution, but in the sheer hatred and rage with which it was carried out. It was clear that Nicholas harbored an especially violent resentment towards him. But why? Was it jealousy? Was it that Kyle represented everything Nicholas was not? All he had lost: friendship, ambition, a future? These are the kinds of questions that haunt those who try to make sense of such horrors. At 5:30 a.m., Nicholas stepped over the bodies of his family and calmly walks out of the flat. He left behind a scene of absolute horror. The walls were painted red. Blood pooled around the corpses. The silence was unnatural, broken only by the faint hum of a refrigerator. He should have left immediately for the school, but something changed. A neighbor knocked on the door. Mariam Abbas, living in the flat below, had heard the struggle. She listened for a moment, then ran away in terror as gunshots rang out. She called the police. The response was immediate. By 5:33 a.m., officers had arrived at the scene, but Nicholas had already vanished into the darkness. For 2 hours, Nicholas hid in the woods nearby, watching, waiting for the moment to head to St. Joseph's Primary School. He wanted to slaughter 30 children during their morning assembly, but fate intervened. His plan had collapsed. The school would be locked down. It was 7:50 a.m. He made a decision. He calmly walked out of the trees, his hands still covered in blood, and flagged down a passing police car. As officers approached, Nicholas raised his fist in a salute, whispering, "It's not murder." He led them to the shotgun and ammo, still hoping to be remembered as a legend. As he was cuffed and shoved into the back of the car, his dreams of infamy were over. The bodies of Juliana, Kyle, and Giselle were found shortly after. The horror inside Flat 82 was beyond comprehension. Unbeknownst to them, the worst nightmare had been prevented. The officers ordered him to put his hands up. Moving cautiously, they handcuffed him. Nothing that he seemed calm, almost robotic. One officer muttered, "I think we have the suspect." Nicholas, still eerily expressionless, tilted his head slightly and smirked. "Did you see my fake gun license in my room? It was perfect. I made it myself." This wasn't a confession, it was a boast. As they put him back into the back of the police car, Nicholas remained emotionless. He had no regret, no remorse, no fear. His dream of being a mass murderer, however, had failed, but he still wanted to be remembered. He asked officers if the school had gone into lockdown, disappointed that his plan had failed. Even behind bars, his name would remain a stain, a reminder of what happens when a mind is consumed by darkness. Nicholas had wanted to kill 30 children. Instead, he was stopped before he could fire another shot. In the cold courtroom months later, he had shown no remorse. He simply sat, staring ahead, indifferent to the world, and when the judge sentenced him to 49 years in prison, he didn't even flinch. His dream of mass slaughter had failed, but for those left behind, the nightmare will never end. With the blood of his mother and siblings still warm on his hands, Nicholas Prosper stood out of Flat 82 at Leabank Tower in Luton. His plan had fallen apart. His family hadn't died silently in their sleep. The brutal struggle with his mother had woken his neighbors, and the call to the police had already been made. Once Nicholas was in custody, the full horror of what had happened began to unfold. His mother, Juliana, his brother, Kyle, and his sister, Giselle, were all found dead inside the flat. Each had a gunshot wound to the head. Kyle had been stabbed over 100 times. Nearby, police found the shotgun and 33 unused cartridges hidden in a bush. As detectives dug deeper, they discovered Nicholas' meticulous planning. He'd undertaken months of research into school shootings, dozens of online rants glorifying mass murder, videos where he spoke about his destiny to be the worst killer of the 21st century, a fake gun license so perfectly crafted that even the seller had believed it. And then came the most disturbing detail. In prison, Nicholas whispered to a nurse, "I wish I had killed more." This wasn't rage-fueled violence. This was temporary insanity. This was cold, calculated evil. At an early court hearing, in a moment that shook the room, Nicholas' father, Ray Prosper, called out to Nicholas, "I still love you, son. I know it's not your fault, okay?" Even in the face of unimaginable, he clung to love, to forgiveness. Maybe it was a desperate attempt to make sense of it all. Maybe it was a father's refusal to believe that the boy he had once held in his arms had become something so utterly unrecognizable. But as the time passed, his sorrow turned to an empty, aching void. "Part of my soul died too," he would later say in his victim impact statement, because the truth was he had lost not just his wife and 2 of his children, but his 3rd child as well, the one who was still alive, but who might as well have been dead. From the moment Nicholas Prosper stepped into Luton Crown Court, he made it clear he felt nothing. He showed no emotion as the gruesome details of his crimes were read aloud. He refused to stand when addressed by the judge. At times, he rocked back and forth as if bored by the proceedings. The prosecution painted a picture of a remorseless, self-obsessed killer who had planned an atrocity for over a year. Key points of the trial: Nicholas pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, purchasing a firearm with a forged license, possessing a shotgun with intent to endanger life, and possessing a knife in public. Prosecutor Timothy Craig stated, "This was not an act of madness. This was killing for the sake of killing." He wanted to be more famous than Sandy Hook. A forensic psychiatrist had described Nicholas as a young man with psychopathic tendencies, an extreme lack of empathy and remorse, and a deep fascination with death and suffering. The judge, Mrs. Justice Kima Grubb, delivered a damning assessment. "You intended to unleash disaster on the community of Luton. Your plans were intelligent, calculating, and selfish. Your only ambition was notoriety." As the verdict loomed, Nicholas sat with his head in his hands, but it was not in sorrow. He was not ashamed. He wasn't sorry. He was disappointed that he had failed. On March 19th, 2025, the courtroom fell silent as the judge passed sentence. Nicholas received a sentence of life in prison, a minimum of 49 years before parole. For a 19-year-old, that effectively meant he would die behind bars. The judge told him bluntly, "You may be too dangerous to ever be released," but Nicholas barely reacted. For the first time in his life, Nicholas Prosper had no control, no notoriety, no fame, no massacre, only 4 walls, a prison cell, and a lifetime to rot in obscurity. The story of Nicholas Prosper is one of horror, wasted potential, and the terrifying power of radicalization in isolation. Could his family have seen the warning signs? Could his teachers have done more? Could the system have stopped him before he forged that gun license? We'll never truly know. What we do know is that the 3 innocent lives were stolen that day, and if not for fate, dozens more children would have died at his hands. Nicholas Prosper wanted to become infamous. Instead, he became a prisoner, forgotten and alone. And perhaps the greatest tragedy of all, at some point, Nicholas Prosper himself was just another child, a boy who could have had a future, who could have chosen a different path, but in the end, he chose darkness. But even as he sits behind bars, sentenced to 49 years in prison, the wounds he left behind are painful and deep. But all hope isn't lost, as wounds eventually heal with time. His father, his surviving brother, the community that once knew him as a quiet, reclusive boy, for them, life will never be the same again without those cherished loved ones lost. I hope they find forgiveness for Nicholas, peace in their hearts and joy in their lives once more. And may the souls of Juliana, Kyle and Giselle prosper. Rest in peace.